Breaking news from the palace walls. And I need you to sit down for this one because what I'm about to share with you isn't just another royal headline. This is the kind of story that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Everything you've been told. Everything that's been carefully packaged and presented to the world as fact. Tom Bower, the man who doesn't back down from uncomfortable truths, the biographer who's made a career out of peeling back layers the powerful would rather keep sealed, has just dropped something that changes the entire Meghan Markle narrative. Not just adjusts it. Not just adds context. But fundamentally rewrites it. We're talking about age. Yes, age. And I know what you're thinking. Really? That's what this is about. But stay with me, because this isn't about vanity or Hollywood beauty standards or some petty tabloid gotcha moment. This is about something far more calculated, far more deliberate, and honestly, far more unsettling. Because according to Bower's findings, the timeline we've all accepted about Meghan's life, the dates, the sequence of events, the carefully constructed biography that's been repeated in every magazine profile and every documentary, it doesn't just have small inconsistencies. It has structural cracks. The kind that make you ask, if this part was rewritten, what else was? Can you imagine this? A woman who stepped onto the world stage as a royal, who gave interviews about her authentic self, who built an entire brand around truth-telling and transparency, potentially carrying a secret so fundamental that it required altering public records and reshaping her own history. And here's what makes this even more gripping. This isn't coming from anonymous internet sleuths or conspiracy theorists working in basement forums. This is coming from documented evidence. From people who were there. From records that don't lie. From a father who noticed something was wrong from the very beginning. So before we dive deep into what Tom Bower uncovered, before we examine the documents and the timelines and the witnesses, I need you to ask yourself one question. Why would someone need to change their age? What doors does a different birth date open? What opportunities does it create? And more importantly, what is it hiding? Because by the end of this investigation, you're going to see Meghan Markle's story in a completely different light. Not the polished Netflix version. Not the Oprah-approved narrative. But the version that exists in the margins, in the records people forgot to scrub, in the memories of those who were paying attention before the world was watching. Let's begin where this unraveling truly starts, with a father who noticed something wrong. Thomas Markle isn't just Meghan's estranged father. He's also the first person, according to sources close to the family, who raised questions about inconsistencies in his daughter's official biography, questions that were quietly dismissed, brushed aside, and eventually buried under the weight of her royal transformation. But here's what nobody talks about. Fathers remember. They remember hospital visits. They remember first days of school. They remember birthdays in a way that's hard to fake because those memories are tied to their own lives, their own experiences, their own calendars. And Thomas Markle remembers something different than what the world was told. Now, we need to tread carefully here because family dynamics are complicated, especially when one family member becomes globally famous and the other is left on the outside looking in. But what Tom Bower uncovered isn't just Thomas Markle's word against official records. It's a pattern. A series of small discrepancies that, when laid out side by side, start to tell a very different story. Let's start with the basics. According to every official biography, every magazine profile, every royal announcement, Meghan Markle was born on August 4, 1981. That's the date. That's what's been repeated thousands of times across media platforms worldwide. Rachel Meghan Markle, born in Los Angeles, California, on a summer day in 1981. Simple, right? Clear. Documented. Except, sources close to Thomas Markle's inner circle have suggested that he remembers his daughter being born earlier. Not months earlier. Not weeks. But potentially years earlier. And before you dismiss this as a confused father mixing up memories, consider this. When would a father forget the year his daughter was born? Can you imagine this? You're watching your daughter grow up. You're there for the childhood milestones. You're watching her navigate elementary school, then middle school, then high school. And then suddenly, when she enters the entertainment industry, when she starts auditioning for roles, when she begins building a career in Hollywood, the timeline shifts. The dates change. The official age becomes younger than you remember. Why would that happen? Tom Bower's investigation suggests that this isn't just about Thomas Markle's memory. It's about a strategic recalibration that happened at a very specific moment in Meghan's life, right when she was trying to break into Hollywood. Right when being a few years younger could mean the difference between getting cast or getting passed over. Right when the industry's obsession with youth made every year on paper matter more than the truth. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Once Bauer started pulling at this thread, he didn't just find family whispers. He found documents, old records, registration forms, school enrollments, the kind of paperwork that doesn't usually get attention but that tells its own quiet story when someone actually bothers to look. Now, we're going to explore those documents in detail, and trust me, what they reveal is going to make you question how much of Meghan's carefully constructed narrative was real and how much was, let's call it, optimized for public consumption. But before we get there, I need to ask you something. Have you ever noticed how Meghan's age seemed to shift depending on which interview you watched? How in some early Hollywood press materials, the math didn't quite add up? How certain timelines in her career seemed impossibly compressed? Most people didn't notice. Most people had no reason to look that closely. But Tom Bauer did. And what he found changes everything. Let me know in the comments. Did you ever sense something was off about Meghan's timeline? Did dates ever seem inconsistent to you? Because you're not alone. And as we're about to discover, there were others who noticed too. They just didn't have the platform or the research to prove it until now. We'll be right back with the documents that started cracking this case wide open. Stay with us. Let's talk about Hollywood for a moment. Not the glamorous version you see on red carpets, but the brutal, age-obsessed machine that chews up actresses and spits them out the moment they cross invisible lines. In Hollywood, 30 is old for a woman. 35 is practically ancient. And if you're trying to break into the industry in your late 20s, still auditioning for young girlfriend roles, still competing with 22-year-olds fresh out of acting school, every single year on your driver's license matters. This isn't speculation. This is how the entertainment industry operates. And Meghan Markle knew this better than most because she spent years grinding through that system, audition after audition, rejection after rejection, small role after small role, trying desperately to break through. Now here's where Tom Bauer's investigation gets fascinating. Because according to his research, Meghan didn't just happen to get her age wrong on a few casting forms. The shift appears to have been systematic, strategic, calculated in a way that suggests someone understood exactly what they were doing and why. Let's look at the timeline everyone accepts. If Meghan was born in August 1981, that means when she landed her breakthrough role on Suits in 2011, she would have been turning 30. 30 years old, landing her first major TV role after years of struggling. Plausible? Absolutely. It happens. But sources close to the production, speaking to investigators years later, remember something different. They remember Meghan seeming older, more experienced. Not in a bad way. In fact, her maturity and professionalism were assets. But several people on set distinctly recall thinking she seemed like someone who'd been in the industry longer than her official biography suggested. Can you imagine this? You're working with someone daily. You're having conversations. You're getting to know their history, their career struggles, their stories about past auditions and past roles. And slowly, quietly, you start to realize that the math doesn't quite work. That the timeline they are presenting doesn't match the experience they clearly have. Now, nobody said anything publicly. Why would they? It wasn't their business. Meghan was talented, professional, easy to work with. Who cares if her actual age was a few years different than what was listed on her IMDb page? But Tom Bauer cares. Because to him, this isn't just about vanity or Hollywood image management. This is about a pattern of reshaping reality to fit a more marketable narrative. And if Meghan was willing to adjust something as fundamental as her birth date to advance her career, what else was she willing to adjust? Here's what we know from Bauer's research. During Meghan's early Hollywood years, we're talking late 1990s, early 2000s, there are records that suggest she may have been older than publicly stated. School enrollment records. Class reunion information. Early headshots with dates that don't quite line up with the official timeline. Now, these aren't smoking gun documents. They are breadcrumbs. Small inconsistencies that individually mean nothing but collectively start to paint a picture. The kind of picture where someone made a deliberate choice at some point to recalibrate their public age by a few years. And look, let's be honest, in Hollywood, this isn't unheard of. Actresses have been shaving years off their official ages since the studio system began. It's almost expected. The industry practically encourages it because the alternative is admitting that the way Hollywood treats aging women is fundamentally broken. But here's the difference. Most actresses who do this aren't later going to marry into the British royal family. They aren't going to become global figures whose every detail gets scrutinized. They aren't going to build brands around authenticity and truth-telling while potentially carrying a secret about something as basic as their birth date. And that's what makes this so significant. Because once Meghan became the Duchess of Sussex, once she started giving interviews about finding her voice and living her truth, the question of whether her age was accurate stopped being a harmless Hollywood white lie and became something else entirely. It became a crack in the foundation of her credibility. Think about it, if this one detail was adjusted, what else might have been smoothed over, edited, or reframed to create the perfect public image? Her childhood stories? Her college experiences? Her early career struggles? Where does the real Meghan end and the carefully constructed narrative begin? Tom Bower suggests that this age discrepancy is just the beginning. That once you start looking closely at Meghan's pre-royal life, you find a lot of stories that seem, let's say, optimized. Shaped to create a specific impression. Edited to support a particular version of events. And before anyone accuses this of being a hit piece, let me be clear. This isn't about vilifying Meghan. This is about understanding how modern celebrity works. How public figures construct their images. How the line between reality and branding blurs so completely that even basic biographical facts become negotiable. But it's also about asking, when someone does this, when they adjust their own history to fit a more appealing narrative, what does that tell us about their relationship with truth? Let me ask you, do you think Hollywood age adjustment is harmless? Or does it matter when that person later becomes a public figure claiming to champion authenticity? Drop your thoughts below because I genuinely want to know where you stand on this. Now, we're about to look at the specific documents Tom Bower uncovered, the school records, the registration forms, the early promotional materials that tell a different story than the official biography. And I'm warning you now, once you see these inconsistencies laid out, you can't unsee them. Stay with us. This is just getting started. Here's where we move from speculation to documentation. From family memories to actual paper trails. Because Tom Bower didn't just rely on hearsay or gut feelings, he did what good investigators do. He found the records. And what those records show is troubling. Not because they prove some grand conspiracy, but because they reveal small, consistent discrepancies that suggest someone's official story was carefully edited at some point. Let's start with school records. Now, obviously, we're not going to display anyone's private educational documents on screen. That would be inappropriate and potentially illegal. But sources familiar with Bower's research have confirmed that he obtained information about Meghan's enrollment at various schools throughout her childhood, and those records paint an interesting picture. According to these sources, the timeline of Meghan's education, when she started certain grades, when she graduated from high school, when she enrolled in college, doesn't perfectly align with the birth date of August 1981 that's been publicly established. Can you imagine this? You're a researcher, and you're cross-referencing graduation years with birth dates, and suddenly the math is off. Not by a lot. Not in a way that screams fraud. But enough that you have to stop and ask, wait, if she graduated in this year, and she was born in 1981, then she would have been this age, but that doesn't make sense given the normal progression through school. Now, before anyone jumps in with maybe she skipped a grade, or maybe she was held back. Sure, those are possibilities. But Tom Bower's research suggests the inconsistencies aren't explained by educational acceleration or delays. They're explained by something simpler, the official birth date being younger than the actual one. Then there are the early headshots. Every actor has them. Those early career photos you submit to casting directors, often with your name, contact info, and age printed right on them. Meghan was no exception. She had headshots circulating in the late 1990s and early 2000s as she tried to break into the industry. And here's where things get interesting. Some of those early headshots, according to people who worked in casting during that period, listed an age that doesn't match the math if you're working backward from an August 1981 birth date. Now, casting directors see hundreds of headshots. They don't usually commit ages to memory. But a few people, when asked years later about Meghan Markle's early career, remembered thinking, wait, I thought she was older than that official bio says. Again, this isn't smoking gun evidence. This is pattern recognition. This is what happens when multiple data points all suggest the same thing, that at some point between Meghan's early life and her official public emergence, her age was adjusted younger. And look, I want to be fair here. It's possible these are honest mistakes. It's possible records were misinterpreted. It's possible memories are faulty. But Tom Bower isn't some random person making wild accusations. He's a serious biographer who's written extensively about powerful figures, and his reputation depends on accuracy. So when he says he's found evidence suggesting Meghan's age doesn't match her official biography, we have to take that seriously. Here's what else Bower uncovered. Class reunion information. Now, this is where things get really interesting because class reunions are organized around specific graduation years. If you graduated in 1999, you go to the class of '99 reunion. Simple. But according to sources who attended the same high school as Meghan, there were questions about which reunion she would have been invited to based on her official graduation year versus what people actually remembered about when she was at the school. Can you imagine this? You're organizing a reunion, and you're trying to figure out who to invite, and someone's name comes up, and half the group says she was in our class and the other half says no, she was a year ahead or she was a year behind, and nobody can quite agree on the timeline. That's the kind of confusion that suggests something was changed. Something was adjusted. And people's organic memories of when someone was actually present don't match the official record that was later established. Now, I know some of you are thinking, why does this matter? So what if she's a couple years older than she claimed? That doesn't affect anything important. And you're right, in isolation, this seems trivial. But remember, we're not just talking about Meghan Markle the actress trying to extend her career in an ageist industry. We're talking about Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, who gave a historic interview with Oprah Winfrey and made serious allegations about the royal family. Who built a brand around authenticity and speaking her truth. Who positioned herself as someone who had been silenced and was finally breaking free to tell her real story. If that real story includes having adjusted her age for professional reasons, and never correcting it even after becoming one of the most scrutinized women on the planet, what does that tell us about her relationship with truth? What does it say about which details are negotiable in the construction of public image? Tom Bower would argue it tells us a lot. It tells us that Meghan Markle has always understood the power of narrative control. Has always known how to shape her story to create maximum impact. Has always been willing to adjust details, even fundamental ones, if it served her goals. And look, that's not necessarily evil. It's strategic. It's smart, even. But it does complicate the image of Meghan as someone who simply wanted to live authentically and was prevented from doing so by the cruel machinery of the royal family. Because if she was already curating her image, already adjusting her biography, already shaping her narrative before she ever met Harry, then maybe the tension between Meghan and the institution wasn't about authenticity versus control. Maybe it was about who got to control the narrative, her or them. Let me know in the comments. Does adjusting your age for Hollywood reasons disqualify someone from later claiming to be a truth teller? Or are these separate issues? I'm genuinely curious what you think. We're going to take a quick breath here, but when we come back, we're diving into something even more explosive, what Tom Bower discovered about how this age discrepancy may have affected Meghan's relationship with the royal family. Because if palace officials knew about this, and there's evidence suggesting they might have, it changes everything about how we understand the breakdown between the Sussexes and the institution. Stay with us. You're not going to want to miss this next part. Now we enter the truly fascinating territory. Because if Meghan's age was adjusted at some point in her early career, and if there are documents that suggest this, then we have to ask a crucial question. Did the royal family know? And if they knew, what did they do with that information? Tom Bower's research suggests something that should make everyone sit up and pay attention. The palace vetting process, the incredibly thorough background checks that happen when anyone gets close to marrying into the royal family, would almost certainly have uncovered any discrepancies in biographical information. Let me explain how this works. When Harry started getting serious with Meghan, royal protection officers and palace officials would have conducted extensive background checks. We're not talking about a basic Google search. We're talking about deep investigative work, financial records, employment history, educational background, legal issues, past relationships, everything. The royal family doesn't take chances with people who might become working royals. They can't afford to. Every detail gets scrutinized because any hidden scandal or inconsistency could later explode into a public crisis. So if there were documents suggesting Meghan's age had been adjusted, if there were school records or early career materials that didn't align with her official biography, the palace vetting team would have found them. Can you imagine this? You're a palace official, and you're reviewing background information on your prince's new girlfriend, and you notice something odd. Small inconsistencies in dates. Records that don't quite match up. Nothing scandalous, necessarily, but enough to raise questions. What do you do with that information? According to sources familiar with palace protocols, something like this would have been noted in reports. Not necessarily flagged as a major problem, but documented. Because the palace keeps records of everything. They build comprehensive files on people who might join the family, and those files include information that might seem trivial but could become relevant later. Now here's where this gets interesting. If the palace knew about potential age discrepancies and didn't raise them publicly, that tells us something important. It tells us they made a strategic choice. They decided this particular inconsistency wasn't worth making an issue over. But it also means they had leverage. They had information about Meghan that she might not want publicized. And in the complicated power dynamics between an institution and an individual, leverage matters. Think about it. If Meghan ever became too difficult, if she ever pushed back too hard against palace protocols, if she ever threatened to break ranks and tell her own story to the media, the institution would have information they could quietly use to complicate her narrative. Not by going public with it directly. The palace rarely operates that crudely. But by making sure certain journalists had access to certain documents. By ensuring that if Meghan ever positioned herself as a victim of palace lies, there would be questions about her own relationship with truth. Tom Bower suggests that this dynamic, the palace knowing things about Meghan that she would prefer stayed buried, may have been part of the tension that eventually led to the Sussex departure. Because Meghan is someone who values control over her own narrative, who spent years carefully curating her image, who adjusted her biography to create maximum professional advantage. And suddenly she was inside an institution that had its own information, its own files, its own understanding of who she really was. An institution that didn't need her version of events because they had done their own research. That's a terrifying position for someone like Meghan. Because it means she couldn't fully control the story. Couldn't guarantee that her carefully constructed image would hold. Couldn't be certain that the palace wouldn't, at some point, use what they knew to undermine her. Now, let's be clear, there's no evidence the palace explicitly threatened Meghan with this information. That's not how they operate. The threat is implicit. It's in the knowledge that they know. It's in the understanding that they could, if necessary, complicate her narrative. And for someone who had spent years building a particular image, that implicit threat must have been unbearable. Can you imagine being in that position? You've carefully shaped your public story. You've adjusted details to create maximum impact. You've built a brand around authenticity while knowing there are parts of your past that don't quite match the official version. And then you marry into an institution that knows everything. That has files. That has documents. That has the power to quietly discredit you without ever saying a word publicly. That's the nightmare scenario for anyone who values narrative control. And it might explain, better than any other theory, why Meghan seemed so determined to get out. Not just out of royal duties, but out from under the palace's knowledge of who she really was. Tom Bower's investigation suggests that this dynamic, the palace having information they weren't using but could use, was a major factor in the breakdown of the Sussexes' relationship with the royal family. Because Meghan couldn't operate the way she was used to operating. Couldn't shape her story with complete freedom. Couldn't be certain the palace wouldn't eventually reveal what they knew. And so she did what she thought was the only option. She left. She and Harry removed themselves from the institution before the institution could use what it knew against them. But here's the irony Tom Bower points out. By leaving and then going public with their grievances, first through friends leaking to the media, then through the Oprah interview, then through Harry's memoir, they actually made it more likely that information about Meghan's past inconsistencies would eventually come out. Because once you position yourself as the truth-teller standing against a dishonest institution, people start looking very carefully at your own relationship with truth. And when they look, they find things. Small discrepancies. Documents that don't match. Timelines that seem adjusted. Things like, say, questions about whether your publicly stated age is accurate. Let me ask you, if you were the palace, and you knew about these discrepancies, would you have raised them early on? Or would you have kept them in reserve as quiet leverage? And does having that information make you powerful or just complicit in the deception? Tom Bower's exposure of potential age discrepancies in Meghan Markle's biography isn't really about age. It never was. It's about something much bigger, the nature of modern celebrity, the construction of public image, and the question of who gets to control the truth. Let's zoom out for a moment. We live in an era where personal branding is everything. Where your public image can be carefully curated through social media, strategic interviews, and selective storytelling. Where the line between your authentic self and your public persona becomes so blurred that even you might lose track of where one ends and the other begins. Meghan Markle is, in many ways, a perfect example of this modern phenomenon. She understood early in her career that success wasn't just about talent, it was about image. About crafting a story that people wanted to buy into. About making strategic choices, even about something as seemingly insignificant as your stated age, to create maximum opportunity. And you know what? That's not unusual. That's how the game works now. Everyone from influencers to politicians to corporate executives understands that managing your narrative is as important as the actual work you do. But here's where it gets complicated. What happens when someone who's built their career on strategic narrative control suddenly positions themselves as a victim of narrative manipulation? When they claim that others have lied about them, silenced them, prevented them from telling their truth, while potentially carrying their own adjustments to that truth. That's the uncomfortable question Tom Bauer is forcing us to confront. Can you imagine this? You've spent your entire adult life carefully shaping how you're perceived, making strategic choices about which details to emphasize and which to downplay, adjusting facts where necessary to create more favorable outcomes. And then, when you encounter an institution that's even better at narrative control than you are, you position yourself as the authentic truth-teller being oppressed by dishonest powers. Is that hypocritical? Or is it just the nature of competing narratives, where everyone's trying to control their story and some players have more power than others? Bauer would argue it's a bit of both. He's not saying Meghan's claims about the royal family are false. He's saying they are one version of truth, her version, shaped by her perspective, edited to create maximum sympathy and impact. Just like her age might have been one version of truth, shaped to create maximum professional opportunity. And here's the thing, the royal family does the same thing. They control information. They shape narratives. They adjust facts to suit their institutional needs. The difference is they've been doing it for centuries, so they are better at it. They are more subtle. They don't need to go public because they've already established the dominant narrative framework. So what we witnessed with the Sussex departure and the subsequent media war wasn't really about truth versus lies. It was about competing narrative control. It was about who gets to define the story, the institution or the individual, the establishment or the disruptor. And in that battle, details matter. Small inconsistencies matter. Because if you're going to claim moral authority, if you're going to position yourself as the truth teller against the forces of deception, your own relationship with truth had better be spotless. That's why Tom Bauer's investigation into Meghan's age matters. Not because the age itself is significant, but because it reveals that her relationship with truth is more complicated than the simple narrative she's presented. It shows she's willing to adjust facts when it serves her. It demonstrates she understands the strategic value of shaping your biography. Which means we should approach all of her claims, about the palace, about her treatment, about her experiences, with nuance. Not dismissing them entirely, but understanding they are her version, crafted with all the skill she's developed over years of managing her public image. Now, what does this mean going forward? For Meghan, this revelation complicates her brand. She's built her post-royal career on authenticity, on speaking truth to power, on being the voice that refused to be silenced. But if questions about her fundamental biographical details persist, that brand becomes harder to maintain. For the royal family, this probably vindicates their decision to let the Sussexes leave rather than fighting to keep them. If they knew about these kinds of discrepancies and chose not to make them public, it shows remarkable restraint. It also shows they understood that the truth would eventually surface without them having to be the ones to expose it. For us, as observers, it's a reminder to approach all celebrity narratives with healthy skepticism. Not cynicism, skepticism. The understanding that everyone is managing their image, everyone is shaping their story, and the version we see publicly is rarely the complete picture. So let me ask you one final time. After everything we've explored today, do you see Meghan Markle differently? Do you think the age question matters, or is it a distraction from larger issues? And ultimately, whose responsibility is truth? The individuals, the institutions, or ours as the audience demanding it? Let me know in the comments. Share your perspective. And if this investigation made you think differently about how we evaluate public figures and their claims, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Because Tom Bauer's revelation about Meghan's age isn't just about one person's biography. It's about how we construct identity in the modern world. How we balance authenticity with ambition. How we navigate the impossible demand to be both perfectly honest and strategically successful. And it's about remembering that truth is complicated. That everyone has their version. And that the most compelling narratives are often the ones that have been most carefully crafted. Thank you for staying with us through this entire investigation. If you want more deep dives into royal stories that go beyond the headlines, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. We're not done unraveling the mysteries behind the palace walls. Until next time, keep questioning. Keep looking beyond the official story. And keep asking, what aren't they telling us? Because the answer is always more than you think.